Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. Locating vulnerable masculinities among child-free men in urban India is a paper recently published in the Journal of Gender Studies by Sreeparna Chattopadhyay. Sreeparna is a PhD in anthropology from Brown University in Rhode Island and a professor at Manipal Academy of Higher Education in Bengaluru and a visiting professor at Flame University in Pune. She already has 60 publications on various anthropological topics, but this one was slightly different as it was about antinatalist and child-free men in India. The paper talks about child-free urban Indian men. The typical profile of subjects is men who are mostly upper caste, at least graduate and professionally employed mostly in STEM jobs, that is jobs in science, technology, engineering and mathematics. This combination talks about a group of people who are relatively privileged. These are men in a deeply patriarchal society, mostly upper caste in a heavily casteist society, educated and urban in STEM jobs in a country where youth unemployment is rife. The Indians who don't fit this profile aspire to be in one. Traditional Indian parents want their sons to be in this club and daughters to be married to men in this group. So, how can this group be vulnerable just by being child free and antinatalist? And before you guess, this paper is not about victimhood of caste-based reservations in education and government jobs, which is prevalent form of affirmative action in India. It is also not about fragile masculinities threatened by improving education and status of women. Talking about what these vulnerabilities are not, Sreeparna says this is distinct from the concept of male fragility, where men feel offended or defensive when their privilege or masculinity or traditional gender roles are challenged. The vulnerability here underlies the reasons of why these men are antinatalists or child-free and the consequences of being such. Although the terms child-free and antinatalist mean different things, they are sometimes used interchangeably in the paper, and it is not clear if the men being studied follow any boundaries between the two. Their reasons to be child-free include environmental considerations such as overpopulation, overconsumption, carbon footprint, etc., to prevent transmission of intergenerational trauma, to disrupt the heritability of serious mental health illnesses, concerns about future uncertainties with finance and employment, and changing norms that prioritize individual autonomy over collectivized caste-based or familial decision making. These reasons reflect understandings of a polycrisis which has naturally deepened anxieties, making non-procreation a responsible choice to address that crisis. The combination of multiple crises at the same time, like environmental, personal, financial, or medical, is indicative of vulnerabilities these men face. The consequence of not reproducing also makes them vulnerable in the caste structure. Caste in India is sustained by a combination of two things. One is endogamy, that is marrying within one's own caste, and two, reproduction, primarily of male children. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the first among scholars of caste in India, argued that caste endogamy and subsequent biological reproduction consolidates the social reproduction of caste and was the primary mechanism by which caste hegemony continues in Indian society. By opting out of one of the most important rites of passage, that is becoming a father and potentially begetting a son, a child-free man, whether he intended to or not, is not reproducing caste endogamy or heteropatriarchy to some extent. They also resist the stereotypical masculine expectations set by the patriarchal Indian society. Child-free men express emotions that subvert and resist hegemonic ideals of masculinity. The paper presents two particular case studies. One is of Sandeep, an educated man in his 30s who suffers from climate anxiety. He worries about the kind of environment his children will live in if he brings them here. He also worries about the political climate in the country, which is polarized on religious, caste, lingual, or regional fault lines, sitting on a time bomb of violence about to explode anywhere at any time. He thinks it is too risky to bring a child here. He says, I decided not to have children because our future itself is not guaranteed. Whether we will be alive or not tomorrow, so, how to have children? I love children actually, but I don't want to bring them into this world because I don't want to see them suffer. Note the difference in his thinking. A typical antinatalist would say, I love children and therefore I don't want to bring them here. However, Sandeep seems to want to have children but can't because of the circumstances he finds himself in. That's the vulnerability the paper highlights. Now, whether Sandeep can be called an antinatalist in the sense that we have used the term on this channel is debatable, but but that's probably beside the point. Another man Sreeparna presents is actually a 36-year-old philosopher called Ashok, whose story is much more painful and personal. Ashok's mother has schizophrenia. This in itself poses a risk of passing on the genetic traits to Ashok's children if he decides to have any. On top of that, his father has ALS, which is a progressive neurological disorder. This has happened at a very wrong time. Ashok's life has become more tumultuous since his father's onset of symptoms, which also unfortunately coincided with Shruti's, his wife's, accident. She had a complex fracture that required surgeries and plates and now walks with a limp. His wife, his parents, and he are in three corners of India, which has made traveling difficult. The stress impacted his health. He had to have an emergency surgery to remove his infected gallbladder, developed hypertension, and pus filled blisters on his eyelids that resist treatment and seem idiopathic in nature. Idiopathic means for no particular reasons. This has made Ashok to firmly decide not to have children. Whether he can be called child-free or antinatalist can be debated, but his situation has certainly changed his outlook on life. In his own words, life is shit. I am juggling all three balls and cannot afford to drop any of them. I wish there was one person in my family who was well, just one person. Is that too much to ask? Sreeparna also interviewed many other men, which don't appear as personal stories in the paper. Hopefully, we would know about them in our future works. While conducting this research, Sreeparna also came across many instances of misogyny and religious hatred. This is the unfortunate component of antinatalist and child-free communities. She mentions this in her paper, and I think we should acknowledge this as reality. Another point was about the profiles of men Sreeparna studied. They were following the normative trajectory in almost all aspects of their lives. Most were professionals in STEM. The desired professions for upper caste, middle class men in India were unmarried and were living with parents unless they had migrated for work to another city, had lifestyles consistent with their class and caste status, owned a personal means of transport, had leisure activities that were similar to men with children. Note the point living with parents, which can be misunderstood on a global stage, and this paper was a part of an international journal. Generally, the term living with parents is understood in the West as dependent on parents for living, but this is not true in Eastern cultures like that of India. I, for example, live with my parents, but in reality, it is my parents who live with me because in some ways they have now become dependent on me. From an antinatalist's point of view, that might sound contradictory on the surface, but that's a topic for another day. I came across a master's thesis in Czech language. Translated title is Unrealistic Optimism and Empathy in the Context of Antinatalism by Monika Tronova. It's a 96-page long thesis about psychological aspects of antinatalism and antinatalists. Unrealistic optimism in the title is what has been generally called as optimism bias, the innate tendency to overestimate the likelihood of positive events and underestimate negative ones. So the thesis explores the psychological and philosophical aspects of antinatalism, focusing on the roles of unrealistic optimism and emotional empathy. It provides a Czech translation and psychometric validation of the short antinatalism scale SANS. It concludes saying that individuals with lower levels of unrealistic optimism and higher levels of emotional empathy are more likely to hold antinatalist beliefs. This week, we had the first episode of the Exploring Antinatalism podcast of 2025. It was an interview of Sarah Dierna, who is Master of Philosophy and a PhD student at the University of Catania in Italy. She has already written a lot of articles and papers around antinatalism, including translations of some of David Benetta's works in Italian. The first half of this interview was about all of those papers and the work that Sarah has done and her views on antinatalism. She is an antinatalist philosopher, by the way. The second half, around 30-minute mark, they start talking about her book, It's the Birth That We Didn't Want, History and Theory of Antinatalism. Antinatalist philosophy is dominated by men, so it is refreshing to see someone like Sarah joining the club. Speaking of Exploring Antinatalism podcast, Amanda Suknik had a debate about antinatalism versus pro-natalism with Travis Timmerman in New York on 25th of April at Taste and Talk event. Even though the ticket was $29, the event was sold out. It was organized by Sadia, seen here with Amanda and Travis. Amanda told me that it went well with a tie between them. We will be getting more news on this topic in coming days, more photos, and I'm told a video recording will also be made available. Keep an eye on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast for more updates on this. A YouTube channel, Rethinking, posted a video about how the universe does not have any purpose and therefore we don't have a way to derive any meaning from the events that occur in our universe. This justification is used by many to have children. That falls apart once we realize the utter meaninglessness and indifference of nature. A new and a small channel called Ankit Srivastava made a very nice short video with a thought experiment. Here the host is talking to an alien from an antinatalist planet. The alien explains why they have given up reproduction on their planet while the host questions their actions. This video is in Hindi and talks about most of the important aspects of the axiological asymmetry without technical terms and philosophical jargon, so a very good idea. Lawrence did a video about the prospect of an antinatalist political party. If there were such a political party, how would its manifesto look like and how would its policies around various government departments be like? He covers many departments and policies that you see on the screen. I won't go through each of them here, but you can see that Lawrence has done a thorough job of exploring this. I would also make some updates to this. One important policy which Lawrence misses is on immigration and emigration. Would you be willing to allow people from another country to move into your country to take the places of the non-children? Would you be allowing people to emigrate from your country if they don't agree with your antinatalist government? And these are not straightforward, black and white, binary questions like everything else in politics. Another missing thing is about parenting skills. Lawrence says that you have to go through a parenting course if you were to have children. This is a bit like licensing for reproduction, which has its own issues. Not only is it not enforceable, but has ethical issues too. But again, there could be some shades like cultural incentive to take the course instead of punitive action for defaulters and so on. I would move the policy of assisted dying in the Department of Health as it is an important medical service the state should provide. I would rename the Department of Sentient Welfare to the Department of Sentient Rights. This might sound semantic bickering, but sentient rights or animal rights don't have the recognition that human rights enjoy today. Moreover, welfarist departments generally tend to see animals as a means rather than as ends. So the terms are important, I think. All in all, this is a good thought experiment which helps explore the areas of our society that antinatalism touches on. I call this a thought experiment because democracy to some extent is majoritarian. The more numbers you have, the better it is to gain power. And it is also fundamentally inflationary in terms of population. Antinatalism, on the other hand, is deflationary. This week, there was a deluge of pro-natalist articles in media. They mainly centered around the natal conference that happened in March in Austin, Texas, and around Trump, Vance, and Musk and their pro-natalist administration of the US. I can't cover them all, but here are the three I have chosen. New York Times published an article about how White House assesses ways to persuade women to have more children. It talks about the ideas the current administration is thinking about to incentivize having children. One is 30% reservation in Fulbright program for those who are married and have children. Fulbright program is the most prestigious US government scholarship program where you are sponsored to go abroad and do research in your field. This map shows the countries where you can travel to under Fulbright program scholarship. The idea is to have 30% reservation in this program only for those who are married and have children. Another was to give $5,000 to women on delivering a baby. This made headlines in many media articles. And third was to educate women to use rhythm in their menstrual cycles so they know when they are ovulating and can get pregnant easily. The article mentions that policy experts and advocates of boosting the birth rates have been meeting with White House aides, sometimes handing over written proposals on ways to help or convince women to have more babies. Another idea proposed by the Collinses couple is the National Medal of Motherhood to mothers with 6 or more children. I think the Collinses will soon be eligible for it and probably the first ones to get that medal. Then they can make a big deal of it in all the media attention that they keep on getting. The news is that Trump aides are preparing a highly anticipated report to be released no later than mid-May, recommending ways to make in vitro fertilization more readily available and affordable. While all this is going on, there is also a growing growing division between pro-family and pro-natalists. Pro-family are those conservatives who want to increase baby making, but in a family environment. Family in their imagination is typically comprised of a man married to a woman having biological children together without any reproductive assistance. This is in contradiction to tech bros like Elon Musk and their minions like Simone and Malcolm Collins, who don't mind making babies using technologies like IVF. Moira Donegan wrote in The Guardian, "What is America's pro-natalism movement really about?" She makes similar points as the New York Times article, but is sharp in her criticism of pro-natalist movement. Talking about the ideas proposed to boost fertility, she points out that conspicuously absent from these proposals are any measures to address what actual American mothers describe as their urgent needs, namely paid family leave, affordable childcare, or measures to address America's soaring maternal mortality rate. That's because pro-natalist movement is not really interested in making parenting easier or less burdensome for women. It is not interested in making pregnancy safer or in making childbearing less damaging to women's careers. The real agenda is to encourage primarily white births, to enforce regressive, highly hierarchical and stratified social roles, to push women out of public sphere, and to narrow women's prospects for social, professional and intellectual life to little more than pregnancy, childbirth, childbearing and housekeeping, or as the Collinses might put it,
Kinder, Kirche, Küche.
Moira also criticizes the speed with which the left is eagerly trying to join the pro-natalist movement with a fear of being left behind. Another article was on NPR. They say they want Americans to have more babies. What's beneath the surface? It covered the latest natal conference, the speakers to that conference, and the underlying eugenic, racist, and misogynist tone that many speakers hold. For example, it highlights some thoughts from Kevin Dolan, who is the main organizer of these natal conferences. Dolan has described love between men and women as a relationship between superior and inferior. We are expected to lie about the existence of these hierarchies all of the time. And if our goal is to rehabilitate hierarchies of nature, then the best place to start is the most fundamental natural hierarchies which are found in the family. Modern culture and government policies have created a badly dysfunctional breeding system in which excellence is devalued. Part of the vision of Natal Conference is for it to be a hub for like-minded people to breed a sustainable aristocratic class. If this is not eugenic vision, I don't know what is. Anyway, thanks for watching and see you next time.